As the weather begins to change, the importance of the running back position on your fantasy football rosters, it becomes clearer and clearer each and every day. In Week 10, 20 running backs posted double-digit fantasy production. Considering that we had 4 teams on bye, that's pretty darn impressive. Once again, as we enter week number 11, fantasy managers face replacing some productive backs as the Cardinals, Giants, Buccaneers, and Panthers all head into their bye week. Between those 4 teams, fantasy managers have to seek replacements for 5 backs, each of whom had 15 or more fantasy points last week. If you had James Conner, Tyrone Tracy, Chuba Hubbard, or the Buccaneers duo Bucky Irving and Rachaad White, I am here to help you replace those fantasy points with this week's RotoBaller. Week 11 starts and sits at the running back position, starting with Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts as they take on the New York Jets. Now, do you remember when this Jets team was scary as far as fantasy is concerned? And for running backs, neither do I. That's how long it has been. It seems like it's in the distant past. The Colts running back may have missed 3 contests this season, but in the games that he has played, he has averaged 16.3 fantasy points per game and failed to reach double digits just 1 time. On Sunday, Taylor had 3 rushes of greater than 10 yards. That was the second highest total amongst the running back position, trailing only Chuba Hubbard. Despite that explosive playmaking ability and 107 rushing yards in the first half, the Colts abandoned the running game completely in the second half. We're not talking Madden here. We're talking about professional football. You know what? I digress. I'll come back around to that in a minute. Since 2020, only Derrick Henry has had more explosive runs than Taylor's 60. His explosive run rate of 5.8%, that is tied for the 7th highest mark. Football really isn't that hard. Just give the ball to your good players, and Taylor happens to be one. Sit back and enjoy, Steichen. Coach Steichen, he's already committed to Joe Flacco over Anthony Richardson, so if he plans to keep his job beyond this week, perhaps abandoning the run game against the Jets defense that has allowed 1,067 rushing yards, 342 receiving yards, 2 backs this season, may not be in his best interest. Over the last 4 weeks, the Jets have allowed 460 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns, which have led to the 7th most fantasy points to the position. My second start of the week is Kareem Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Buffalo Bills. Since coming off the couch, all Kareem Hunt has done is produce. We're talking 565 total yards in 6 contests. In those 6 games, Hunt has hit pay dirt 5 times. Since week number 5, Hunt has been the RB8 in fantasy and PPR scoring there, scoring 90 fantasy points, averaging 18 fantasy points per game, and producing 13 or more fantasy points in each of his 5 contests over that period. Hunt has been efficient, especially in the red zone, where he has produced 44.9 fantasy points, which is right there with Alvin Kamara, who has secured 46.9 fantasy points this season of his own. This season, the Bills, they have been the second friendliest fantasy defense for running backs, allowing 29.32 fantasy points per game, conceding 1,007 rushing yards and 545 receiving yards, and a total of 10 total touchdowns. This Chiefs offense, it runs through Hunt. Make no mistake about it. Building off of last week's 28.3 weighted opportunity rate and a season-high 25% target share, while adding in an inferior opponent there into this whole equation, this has all the makings of being Hunt's best game yet. Now another start I'm going to go with, how about David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions versus the Jacksonville Jaguars? Few things in fantasy football are as predictive as David Montgomery finding the end zone. The Iowa State product did it once again on Sunday Night Football, marking his 23rd touchdown in the last 26 games, including playoffs. Montgomery is no Christian McCaffrey, but McCaffrey's previous 28 contests, he's only produced 20 rushing touchdowns. I'm just saying. Montgomery has an explosive run rate of 4.1% this season, 17.1% of his yardage coming off of those explosive runs. The 22 missed tackles forced, that is the 12th most amongst the running back position. That is about 0.18 missed tackles forced per attempt, with 60% of his rushing yards coming after contact. Now the Jacksonville Jaguars, they may be one of the worst teams in the league regarding tackling, which is excellent news for both Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs managers. Heading into week number 11, the Jaguars are allowing 143 total yards per game, along with 12 total touchdowns and an average of 27.11 fantasy points per game. Over the last 4 weeks, the Jaguars have allowed 435 rushing yards, 156 receiving yards, and 6 total touchdowns. I just mentioned some of my favorite matchups this week. Now it's time to turn our attention to some less than favorable ones with the Week 11 sits, those fantasy football busts, and it starts with James Cook, who is set to face the Kansas City Chiefs. There's an excellent chance that you're not sitting Cook this week. I get it. He's been a top 10 fantasy back. He's produced double digits in 8 of 9 games he's partaken in so far this season. However, the Kansas City Chiefs, they are allowing the third fewest fantasy points per game to opposing backs over the last 4 weeks. And throughout the season, no team has allowed fewer than the 14.01 fantasy points per game than the Chiefs have allowed. Kansas City has also allowed just 3 rushing scores, 473 rushing yards, and 248 receiving yards to backs this season. With a problematic matchup at hand, Cook is no better than a low-end RB2 or a flex option this week, but it comes with a substantial risk. Speaking of risks, how about Chase Brown starting against the Los Angeles Chargers? As good as the Chiefs' defense has been, the Chargers' defensive unit, it's not too far behind. LA has allowed just 16.94 fantasy points per game, which is the third fewest. They have also allowed 733 rushing yards, which is the 8th fewest, along with 262 receiving yards. However, their claim to fame through 10 weeks, they've allowed just 2 total touchdowns. That's 1 rushing and 1 receiving to running backs. Last week, the Chargers held Tony Pollard to 44 yards on just 9 carries. Considering the Bengals can't defend the pass, LA may decide to throw more than usual, potentially forcing the Bengals to abandon the run themselves and turning this contest into a shootout. Now, one area of concern for the Bengals is that Brown, he's fumbled the ball twice in the last 5 games. They added Khalil Herbert when Zach Moss went on the IR. Now they're working out Leonard Fournette. Hey, you know what? This may be something, it may not. It's probably not, but hey, I'm going to mention it anyway. And speaking of mentioning things, how about J.K. Dobbins as a sit against this very same Bengals team? Like the Chiefs and the Chargers, the Bengals have been particularly stingy in fantasy on opposing backfields. Last week, even Derrick Henry was held to a modest 68 yards rushing on 16 attempts. Now, he did score, but that is expected when we're talking about the King. Since the Gus Edwards injury, J.K. Dobbins has had a significant portion of those weighted opportunities out of this Chargers backfield. As far back as week number 3, that share has never dipped below 70%. However, last week, with the Gus bus fueled up and ready to roll, Dobbins' weighted opportunity, it dipped to 56.5%. Dobbins registered 18 opportunities when we're counting carries and touches compared to 10 that Edwards saw. But it looks like we are going to see an even more split backfield than we would like here as far as fantasy is concerned. Against the Bengals, a defense that is allowing just 19.85 fantasy points per game this season, a split backfield doesn't serve either back well. But what does serve you well? Head on over to RotoBaller.com and checking out all the latest news and analysis, and heading over to the RotoBaller Discord channel where I'm there to answer your questions 24/7. See you next time.